At my college graduation dinner, my twin brother stood up and announced he was engaged to my fiancé of 3 years, claiming they'd been soulmates all along. "We didn't plan this," he said with fake remorse, "but true love can't be denied." I didn't scream or cry like they expected. Instead, I smiled, raised my champagne glass, and delivered news that shattered their perfect little narrative in ways they never saw coming. Can you imagine sitting at your own graduation celebration, fresh diploma in hand, ready to toast the next chapter of your life, only to watch your twin brother steal the spotlight by announcing his engagement to your fiancé? He stood there with rehearsed guilt plastered across his face, expecting me to crumble into a sobbing mess. What he didn't know was that I'd been 3 steps ahead of him for months, and his shocking announcement was about to become the least surprising thing at that table. Hi, I'm Madison Clark, and this is the story of how my identical twin brother thought he could rewrite our lives to suit his narrative. For 22 years, we'd shared everything. The same face, the same birthday, the same parents who couldn't tell us apart half the time. But Ryan had always resented sharing the spotlight, especially when it came to my successes. What happened at Romano's Italian restaurant in downtown Portland last month wasn't just betrayal. It was the culmination of a lifetime of competition I never knew I was playing. Growing up as an identical twin sounds magical to outsiders, but the reality is more complicated. Ryan and I emerged into the world exactly 7 minutes apart. Me first, a detail he never let me forget. Madison got the head start, he'd joke bitterly whenever I achieved something before him. Our parents, Michael and Sarah Clark, did their best to treat us equally, but subtle differences emerged early. I was the studious one, bringing home perfect report cards and teacher commendations. Ryan was the charmer, winning over adults with his easy smile and quick wit. Madison's our little scholar, Dad would beam, examining my science fair ribbons. And Ryan's our social butterfly, Mom would add, watching him effortlessly make friends at every playground. They thought they were being fair, celebrating our different strengths. What they didn't realize was how those labels would shape us, creating an invisible competition that would define our relationship for decades. In elementary school, Ryan started copying my homework when his natural charm couldn't compensate for his lack of effort. I let him, unable to stand the thought of my twin failing while I succeeded. This pattern continued through middle school. I'd complete assignments twice, once for me and once for Ryan, while he focused on being popular and well-liked. "Why do you help him cheat?" my best friend Emma asked in 8th grade, watching me hurriedly scribble Ryan's name on a duplicate book report. "He's my brother," I replied, as though that explained everything. "We're supposed to look out for each other." But Ryan never reciprocated that loyalty. When I ran for student council president junior year of high school, he undermined my campaign by spreading rumors that I was too uptight for leadership. When I made valedictorian, he complained loudly to our parents that the selection process was biased toward boring overachievers. Every achievement felt tainted by his resentment. College offered escape. I received a full scholarship to Oregon State University for engineering, while Ryan enrolled at Portland Community College, planning to transfer after 2 years. For the first time in our lives, we had separate identities, separate friend groups, separate everything. Those first 2 years were transformative. Without Ryan's shadow, I bloomed socially while maintaining my academic excellence. I joined study groups, participated in undergraduate research, and even dated casually without my twin brother's commentary on my choices. Then, junior year, Ryan transferred to OSU as planned. Suddenly, I was half of the Clark twins again, fielding constant questions about why we looked identical but seemed so different. Ryan had matured during his community college years, focusing more seriously on his business major and toning down the obvious jealousy that had marked our childhood. I was cautiously optimistic that we could finally have a healthy adult relationship. That optimism seemed justified when I met Daniel Rodriguez in my senior year engineering capstone course. Daniel was everything I dreamed of in a partner, brilliant without being arrogant, funny without being cruel, ambitious, but not ruthlessly so. He had warm brown eyes, an infectious laugh, and the rare ability to explain complex concepts in simple terms. Our study sessions turned into coffee dates, which evolved into long walks around campus, discussing everything from thermodynamics to philosophy. "You're going to love my twin brother," I told Daniel about 3 months into our relationship. "Ryan's studying business, so you two might actually have some interesting conversations about the intersection of engineering and commerce." I should have recognized the warning signs during their first meeting. Ryan turned on his full charm offensive, asking Daniel thoughtful questions about his engineering projects and sharing funny stories from our childhood that painted me in an endearing but slightly ridiculous light. Daniel laughed genuinely at Ryan's jokes, and I felt proud watching my 2 favorite people connect. "Your brother's really cool," Daniel told me afterward. "I can see the family resemblance, but you two have such different energies." "Different how?" I asked, genuinely curious about an outsider's perspective on our dynamic. You're more grounded, I guess. Serious about your goals. Ryan seems more spontaneous, more willing to take risks. I filed that observation away, unsure whether it was a compliment or subtle criticism. Over the following months, the three of us began spending significant time together. Ryan would join us for study sessions, campus events, and weekend trips to the coast. I appreciated having my brother and boyfriend get along so well, especially given our family's complicated history. Daniel proposed during winter break of our senior year, presenting me with my grandmother's ring in front of our families at Christmas dinner. The proposal was perfect, heartfelt, intimate, and completely unexpected. As I said yes through happy tears, I caught sight of Ryan's face across the table. For just a moment, his expression flickered with something dark before settling back into his congratulatory smile. "I'm so happy for you both," he said, embracing Daniel warmly and kissing my cheek. "Madison deserves someone amazing." Wedding planning consumed the spring semester of our senior year. Daniel and I decided on a September ceremony after graduation, but before starting our respective careers. I'd accepted a position with Intel in Hillsboro, while Daniel would be working for a renewable energy startup in Portland. Ryan had landed an entry-level position with a marketing firm, also in Portland, which meant we'd all be living in the same metropolitan area after graduation. "It'll be like old times," Ryan said when we discussed our post-graduation living situations. The dynamic duo reunited. The closer we got to graduation, the more time Daniel and Ryan seemed to spend together. They'd grab lunch between classes, work out at the campus gym, and sometimes hang out in the evenings when I was stuck in the engineering lab. I was delighted that my fiancé and twin brother had developed a genuine friendship. Ryan was asking about our honeymoon plans, Daniel mentioned one evening as we studied for finals. He had some great suggestions for romantic destinations. Something about the comment nagged at me, though I couldn't articulate why. Why would Ryan be particularly interested in our honeymoon plans? But I pushed the thought aside, focused on finishing strong academically and preparing for graduation. The first concrete warning sign came 2 weeks before graduation. I'd left my laptop in the library and returned home early to find Daniel and Ryan sitting unusually close together on our apartment couch, their conversation stopping abruptly when I entered. "Hey, babe," Daniel said, his smile seeming forced. "How was the library?" "Crowded. I forgot my laptop," I replied, noting how quickly they'd separated when I walked in. "What were you two talking about?" "Just guy stuff," Ryan answered vaguely. "Work stress, post-graduation anxiety, you know?" I accepted the explanation, but something felt off. Their body language suggested intimacy beyond casual friendship, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what triggered my discomfort. Over the next few days, I noticed other small things. Texts between Daniel and Ryan at odd hours. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. Meaningful glances across dinner tables. When I mentioned these observations to my roommate Jennifer, she looked uncomfortable. "Maybe they're planning some kind of surprise for your graduation?" she suggested weakly. "Maybe," I agreed, though my instincts suggested something less benevolent. The Thursday before graduation, I discovered Daniel's phone unlocked on our kitchen counter while he showered. I'd never violated his privacy before, but the accumulating oddities had created a nagging anxiety I couldn't ignore. With shaking hands, I opened his text messages and navigated to his conversation with Ryan. What I found shattered my world. The messages spanned 3 months, beginning as seemingly innocent friendship, and gradually evolving into something undeniably romantic. "Can't stop thinking about last night," read one from Ryan. "When are you going to tell her?" Asked another from Daniel. "Soon," Ryan had replied. "After graduation. She deserves to be happy for that at least." My hands trembled as I scrolled through weeks of intimate conversations, plans for secret meetings, and discussions about their situation. The betrayal was comprehensive, not a momentary lapse in judgment, but a sustained emotional and physical affair conducted while I planned our wedding and celebrated our engagement. I set the phone down exactly where I'd found it and walked calmly to my bedroom, closing the door before allowing myself to process what I'd discovered. The two people I trusted most in the world had been systematically lying to me for months. My fiancé was cheating with my twin brother, and both were apparently planning to reveal this betrayal after my graduation. The shower was still running. Daniel would emerge soon, kiss me good morning, and continue the charade that had been consuming my life. But now I knew the truth, and that knowledge fundamentally changed everything. I had 3 days until graduation dinner. 3 days to decide how to handle this revelation. Part of me wanted to confront them immediately, to scream and cry and demand explanations. But a larger part, the strategic part that had earned me a 4.0 GPA and a prestigious job offer, recognized an opportunity. If Ryan and Daniel were planning to reveal their relationship after graduation, they clearly expected me to be devastated, to fall apart publicly, to become the pitied victim of their grand love story. They were counting on my emotional collapse to justify their betrayal, to position themselves as star-crossed lovers who couldn't help following their hearts. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, I spent the next 3 days planning my own revelation, something that would shift the narrative in ways they couldn't anticipate or control. By the time I sat down at Romano's for my graduation dinner, I was ready for whatever they had planned. Romano's had been my favorite restaurant since childhood, a cozy Italian place downtown where my family celebrated every milestone. The walls were covered with vintage photographs of Portland, and the smell of garlic and fresh bread always made me feel at home. For my graduation dinner, Mom had reserved the private dining room, decorated with congratulatory balloons and a banner reading, "Congratulations, Madison." I arrived first, having told Daniel I needed to help with setup. In reality, I wanted a few minutes to center myself before the performance began. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a navy blue dress that made me look professional and confident, paired with the pearl earrings my grandmother had given me for my 18th birthday. If this was going to be the night my life changed dramatically, I wanted to look like someone who could handle whatever came next. My parents arrived shortly after, followed by Daniel and Ryan together. They explained they'd met in the parking lot, but I noticed they'd obviously coordinated their arrival. Both were dressed more formally than usual, suggesting they viewed this evening as significant beyond my graduation celebration. "Sweetheart, you look beautiful," Mom said, embracing me warmly. "We're so proud of everything you've accomplished." Dad nodded approvingly. "Engineering degree? Job lined up, wedding planned. You've got your whole future mapped out perfectly." If only he knew how spectacularly wrong that assessment would prove to be. Daniel kissed my cheek, his lips lingering longer than usual in what I now recognized as guilt-driven overcompensation. "How are you feeling, graduate?" he asked with forced cheerfulness. "Excited for what's next," I replied honestly, though not in the way he assumed. Ryan remained quieter than usual during the cocktail hour, nursing his beer and contributing sporadically to conversations about my future plans. I could see him exchanging meaningful glances with Daniel, clearly psyching himself up for whatever announcement they'd rehearsed. We ordered dinner, my parents opting for their usual chicken parmesan, Daniel choosing the seafood risotto, and Ryan selecting the filet mignon he'd never have been able to afford on his own. I wondered briefly if Daniel was paying for Ryan's expensive taste these days, another detail that stung with fresh betrayal. "So, Madison," Mom said as we waited for our entrees, "have you and Daniel set a firm date for the wedding yet?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Actually, we wanted to talk to everyone about that." Here it comes, I thought, maintaining my pleasant expression while internally bracing for impact. Ryan cleared his throat, standing up abruptly. His face was flushed, whether from alcohol or adrenaline. I couldn't tell. "Before we go any further, I have something important to share with everyone." The table fell silent, all eyes turning to my twin brother. In that moment, looking at his face, my face, really, given our identical features, I felt a strange disconnect, as though watching a stranger wear my appearance while committing an unforgivable act. "This is really difficult," Ryan began, his voice shaking with what I now recognized as rehearsed emotion rather than genuine nervousness. "And I want everyone to know that Daniel and I never planned for this to happen." Mom's brow furrowed in confusion. "Planned for what to happen, honey?" Ryan reached across the table and took Daniel's hand, a gesture so intimate and practiced that it clearly wasn't their first public display of affection. "Daniel and I have fallen in love." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my parents' faces cycle through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror as they processed the implications of Ryan's announcement. Dad's face went completely pale, while Mom's mouth opened and closed soundlessly like a fish gasping for air. "We didn't want it to happen," Daniel added, his voice barely above a whisper. "We fought it for months, but sometimes love just..." "Just what?" I interrupted, my voice perfectly calm despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "Just randomly develops between your fiancé's twin brother and you?" How wonderfully convenient. Ryan flinched at my tone, but pressed forward with his prepared speech. "Madison, I know this is shocking, and I know you must hate us right now, but Daniel and I have something real, something neither of us has ever experienced before." "Something real," I repeated slowly, tasting the words. "Is that what you're calling it?" "Madison," Daniel said, reaching toward me across the table. I pulled my hand away before he could touch me. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about the timing, about everything, but I can't marry you when I'm in love with someone else." "In love with my brother," I clarified. "My twin brother, who looks exactly like me." The observation hung in the air, highlighting the particularly twisted nature of their betrayal. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, clearly not having considered how their identical appearance might complicate their narrative of true love. "That's not what this is about," Ryan protested. "This isn't some weird psychological thing. Daniel and I connected on a level that has nothing to do with how we look." "Of course not," I replied dryly. "I'm sure my appearance had absolutely nothing to do with Daniel's initial attraction to you. Pure coincidence that he fell for someone who shares my exact DNA." Mom finally found her voice. "I don't understand. Ryan, Daniel is engaged to your sister. They're getting married in September. Not anymore, Ryan replied with devastating finality. Daniel and I are together now. We wanted to wait until after Madison's graduation to tell everyone, so we wouldn't ruin her celebration. The false consideration in his statement was breathtaking. They'd been conducting their affair for months while I planned a wedding that would never happen, and now Ryan wanted credit for timing their revelation considerately. How thoughtful of you, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Waiting until my graduation dinner to destroy my engagement. Such impeccable timing. Dad leaned forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. How long has this been going on? Daniel and Ryan exchanged glances, clearly having anticipated this question. About 3 months, Daniel admitted. Since spring break. 3 months. 3 months of lies, deception, and manipulation while I blissfully planned our future together. 3 months of my brother and fiancé laughing at my naivety behind my back. I see, I replied calmly, reaching for my water glass with steady hands. 3 months. Well, that certainly explains a lot. Ryan seemed surprised by my composure. In his version of this scene, I should have been crying, screaming, or running from the restaurant in devastation. My calm reaction was clearly not part of their script. Madison, he said hesitantly, I know you're probably in shock right now, but I hope someday you can understand that we never meant to hurt you. Oh, I understand perfectly, I assured him, taking a deliberate sip of water. I understand that you've been planning this revelation for weeks, probably months. I understand that you chose tonight because you thought I'd be too emotionally invested in my graduation celebration to make a scene. I understand that you expected me to break down so you could comfort each other and position yourselves as the real victims in this situation. Both men looked increasingly uncomfortable as I systematically dismantled their carefully constructed narrative. This wasn't going according to their plan. What I don't understand, I continued, is why you think I'm shocked by any of this. Ryan blinked in confusion. What do you mean? I smiled, the expression feeling strange on my face given the circumstances. I mean, I've known about your affair for a week, Ryan. I've read the text messages, seen the photos, and documented everything for my attorney. The color drained from Daniel's face. You... what? Did you really think you were being subtle? I asked, genuinely curious about their thought process. Meeting at the campus coffee shop every Tuesday when I had lab? Using your old childhood code words and text messages? Sharing inside jokes at family dinners? Ryan looked like he might vomit. Madison, I can explain. There's nothing to explain, I interrupted. You're attracted to my fiancé, he's attracted to you, and you both decided to pursue that attraction while lying to me for months. It's actually quite simple. Mom was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to process the complete destruction of our family dynamic. How could you do this to your sister? She whispered to Ryan. Before Ryan could answer, I pulled out my phone and opened the folder I'd created specifically for this moment. Actually, Mom, that's not even the most interesting part of this story. I placed my phone on the table, displaying a photograph I'd taken 3 days earlier. It showed Daniel and Ryan kissing in the parking lot of our apartment complex, completely unaware they were being observed. You see, once I discovered their affair, I decided to do a little investigation of my own, and I uncovered some fascinating information. Daniel reached for the phone, but I pulled it back. I wouldn't do that if I were you. There are plenty more where that came from. Madison, please, Ryan pleaded. Can we discuss this privately? Oh, we're well past privacy, brother dear, I replied sweetly. You made this a public announcement, so let's keep it public. I swiped to the next photo on my phone, a screenshot of Daniel's credit card statement, showing multiple charges to expensive hotels over the past 3 months, always on days when he told me he was working late or studying with classmates. Quite the romantic, our Daniel, I observed. The Hilton, the Marriott, even that boutique place on the waterfront. Though I have to say, I'm impressed by your dedication to maintaining the affair properly. Most cheaters just use each other's apartments. Dad leaned over to examine the evidence, his expression darkening with each revelation. As a lawyer, he recognized the thoroughness of my documentation and the legal implications of what I'd gathered. There's more, I continued, swiping through additional photos and screenshots. Bank records showing Daniel's been paying for Ryan's expensive dinners and purchases for months. Phone records proving they've been in constant contact since February. Even security footage from Daniel's apartment building showing Ryan visiting on nights when I was supposedly studying late. Ryan slumped in his chair, the weight of my evidence crushing his carefully constructed narrative. How did you get all this? I'm an engineer, Ryan, I reminded him. I'm trained to solve problems systematically. Once I suspected something was wrong, I approached it like any other research project. Daniel looked panicked. Madison, I know this looks bad, but if you just let us explain. Explain what? I interrupted. How you've been stealing money from our joint savings account to fund your affair with my brother. How you've been lying to my face every single day for 3 months. How you plan to humiliate me publicly tonight. I pulled out a manila folder I'd been keeping beside my chair. Actually, there's one more thing you should know before we continue this conversation. The folder contained papers I'd prepared meticulously over the past week, working with Dad's law firm to ensure everything was legally sound and strategically advantageous. What's that? Ryan asked warily. Breach of contract notification, I replied matter-of-factly. You see, when Daniel and I got engaged, we signed a cohabitation agreement outlining financial responsibilities and asset division in case of separation. It included a clause about infidelity. Daniel's face went completely white. Madison, you can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious, I assured him. According to the agreement you signed, cheating triggers immediate forfeiture of any claim to shared assets, plus compensation for emotional distress and financial damages. I opened the folder and pulled out a detailed calculation sheet. Let's see. There's the money you stole from our savings account for hotel rooms and romantic dinners with my brother. The wedding deposits I'll lose because of your infidelity. The therapy I'll need to process this betrayal. The legal fees for enforcing this agreement. Dad nodded approvingly as he reviewed my documentation. Despite the personal devastation of the situation, his professional side was clearly impressed by my thoroughness. The total comes to approximately $48,000, I announced. Payable within 30 days of official notification, which I'm serving you right now. Daniel stared at the papers as though they might spontaneously combust. I don't have that kind of money. Then you probably shouldn't have spent our savings account on your affair, I replied unsympathetically. But don't worry. I'm sure Ryan can help you figure something out. After all, this is what he wanted. Ryan had been conspicuously quiet during this exchange, clearly realizing that his fantasy of publicly claiming Daniel had transformed into a legal and financial nightmare. Madison, please, he said desperately. I know you're angry and you have every right to be, but ruining Daniel financially won't change anything. You're absolutely right, I agreed. It won't change the fact that my twin brother and fiancé have been betraying me for months, but it will ensure that actions have consequences, something you've both managed to avoid your entire lives. I stood up, smoothing my dress and gathering my purse. I think our celebration is over for tonight. Where are you going? Mom asked through her tears. To start my new life, I replied simply. The one where I don't waste energy on people who don't value honesty or loyalty. I paused at the table, looking directly at Ryan. By the way, brother dear, there's one more thing you should know about your great love affair. Ryan looked up warily. What? Daniel's been cheating on you too, I announced casually. With his lab partner, Christine. I have photos of them together from last Tuesday night, right around the time you thought he was working late. The bombshell landed exactly as I'd intended. Ryan's face crumpled with shock and betrayal, while Daniel looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. That's not possible, Ryan whispered. Check his phone, I suggested. Text thread with Christine Morrison. Unless he's deleted it in the past few hours, you'll find some very interesting conversations about their study sessions. I discovered Daniel's involvement with Christine purely by accident while investigating his affair with Ryan. Apparently, my fiancé was an equal opportunity cheater, unable to maintain fidelity with anyone. You're lying, Daniel said desperately. Am I? I pulled out my phone and showed Ryan a photo of Daniel and Christine kissing outside the engineering building. This was taken last Tuesday at 9:47 p.m. You texted me at 10:15 asking where Daniel was, remember? I told you he was working late. Ryan snatched my phone, staring at the image with growing horror. The man he'd betrayed his sister for, the relationship he'd sacrificed our family for, was just another of Daniel's deceptions. Jesus Christ, Daniel, Ryan breathed. How many people are you sleeping with? Daniel opened and closed his mouth several times without producing sound, apparently unable to formulate a defense for his serial infidelity. I'd estimate 3 or 4 active relationships at any given time, I replied helpfully. Daniel's very good at compartmentalization. It's actually quite impressive from a logistical standpoint. I turned to my parents, who were watching this destruction of their family with shell-shocked expressions. Mom, Dad, I'm sorry your graduation celebration turned into this nightmare, but I couldn't let them control the narrative any longer. Dad stood up and embraced me tightly. You have nothing to apologize for, sweetheart. I'm proud of how you handled this. Mom joined the embrace, whispering, I'm so sorry, Madison. I can't believe Ryan would do this to you. Over my parents' shoulders, I watched Ryan and Daniel beginning to turn on each other, their grand love story crumbling, as the reality of Daniel's multiple betrayals sank in. 3 months, Ryan was saying bitterly. 3 months, I threw away my relationship with my sister for someone who was lying to me the entire time. It wasn't like that, Daniel protested weakly. Christine was just what? Another sister you could manipulate? I pulled away from my parents' embrace and gathered my belongings. I'll leave you two to sort out your relationship issues. I have a life to rebuild. As I walked toward the restaurant exit, I heard Ryan calling my name. I turned back one final time, looking at my twin brother, who no longer seemed to share anything meaningful with me beyond DNA. Madison, wait, he pleaded. I know I screwed up, but you're my sister. We can work through this. I considered his words carefully before responding. Ryan, for 22 years, I've made excuses for your behavior, covered for your mistakes, and prioritized your happiness over my own well-being. That ends tonight. But we're twins, he said desperately. We're supposed to be there for each other. Being twins doesn't mean I'm obligated to accept betrayal, I replied firmly, and it certainly doesn't mean I have to forgive you just because we're related. I walked out of Romano's feeling lighter than I had in months, despite the complete destruction of my life as I'd known it. The night air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of rain and new possibilities. My phone buzzed with a text from my roommate Jennifer. How's the graduation dinner going? I typed back, life-changing. I'll tell you everything when I get home. As I drove through Portland's quiet streets, I reflected on the evening's events. Yes, my engagement was over, my relationship with my twin brother was probably irreparable, and my carefully planned future had exploded spectacularly. But for the first time in years, I felt completely honest about who I was and what I deserved. The woman who had walked into Romano's was still partially defined by other people's expectations and needs. The woman driving home was entirely her own, accountable only to herself and her own values. 6 months later, I was settling into my new apartment in Hillsborough, a modern one-bedroom near my job at Intel. The divorce paperwork had been finalized smoothly. Daniel's financial obligations from our cohabitation agreement had motivated him to cooperate fully with asset division. He'd eventually come up with the money, though I suspected his parents had helped him avoid bankruptcy. Ryan had attempted to contact me several times in the weeks following graduation dinner, sending long emails about his regret and desire to rebuild our relationship. I'd read them all, but never responded. Some betrayals create wounds too deep for simple apologies to heal. Daniel had moved to Seattle shortly after our relationship ended, taking a position with a tech company there. According to mutual friends, he'd broken up with both Ryan and Christine within weeks of my revelation, apparently unable to maintain his web of deceptions once exposed. Ryan had finished his degree and moved back home with our parents, struggling to find employment after his dramatic personal life implosion had spread through our social circle. Our parents were attending family therapy to process their role in enabling Ryan's behavior patterns, and Mom had started sending me thoughtful texts acknowledging how often they'd prioritized Ryan's needs over mine growing up. Professionally, I was thriving at Intel, working on renewable energy projects that challenged and excited me. My colleagues knew nothing about my personal drama, seeing only a competent engineer who delivered excellent work and maintained professional relationships. I'd started dating again, cautiously, having learned valuable lessons about trust and boundaries. The man I was currently seeing, Marcus, was a software engineer from a different company who'd asked me out after we met at a professional conference. He was nothing like Daniel, straightforward in his communication, consistent in his behavior, and refreshingly drama-free. You seem too good to be true, I told him honestly on our third date. What's the catch? He'd laughed, understanding the wariness behind my question. No catch. I'm just a guy who believes relationships should make your life better, not more complicated. Simple wisdom, but revolutionary for someone emerging from the chaos of betrayal. One evening in December, almost exactly a year after Daniel's proposal, I was decorating my apartment for Christmas when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Ryan standing in the hallway, looking nervous and holding a small wrapped package. I considered not answering, but curiosity won out. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. Hi, Madison, he said quietly. I know you probably don't want to see me, but I was hoping we could talk. He looked different, thinner, less confident than the charming brother I'd grown up with. The past year had clearly been difficult for him as well. What do you want, Ryan? I asked, not unkindly, but without warmth. I wanted to give you this, he said, holding out the wrapped package, and to tell you that I've been in therapy, trying to understand why I've spent my life competing with you instead of supporting you. I accepted the package, but didn't open it. And what have you learned? That I was jealous of everything about you, he admitted. Your grades, your focus, your ability to make people proud without trying so hard. Instead of working on myself, I kept trying to take what was yours or undermine your achievements. The honesty was surprising, though I remained cautious. That doesn't excuse what you did with Daniel. No, it doesn't, he agreed. Nothing excuses that. I destroyed the most important relationship in my life because I was too immature to deal with my own insecurities. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-pity. Instead, I saw genuine remorse and what appeared to be hard-won self-awareness. I'm not ready to forgive you, I told him honestly. I may never be ready. I understand, he replied. I just wanted you to know that I'm working on becoming someone worthy of your forgiveness, even if you never give it to me. After he left, I opened the package. Inside was a childhood photo of us at age 7, building a sandcastle together at the beach, both of us grinning at the camera with genuine joy. On the back, Ryan had written, "Before I ruined everything, I'm sorry, Madison. You deserved better from me." I stared at the photo for a long time, remembering the uncomplicated love we'd shared before competition and jealousy had poisoned our relationship. That version of Ryan, the one who'd helped me catch fireflies and shared his Halloween candy, had been real too, even if he'd been overshadowed by years of toxic behavior. I placed the photo on my bookshelf, not as a symbol of forgiveness, but as a reminder of what we'd lost and what might someday be possible to rebuild if Ryan's transformation proved genuine and lasting. The betrayal at Romano's had shattered my old life completely. But from those fragments, I'd constructed something stronger and more authentic. I was no longer the woman who accepted less than she deserved, who made excuses for others' poor behavior, or who measured her worth through external validation. My 23rd birthday was approaching, and I was planning a quiet celebration with friends who valued honesty and kindness. No family drama, no hidden agendas, no carefully planned betrayals, just genuine people celebrating another year of growth and possibility. As I finished decorating my Christmas tree, I reflected on how much can change in a single year. 12 months ago, I'd been planning a wedding to a man who was systematically lying to me, maintaining a relationship with a brother who was actively betraying me, and living a life built on foundations of deception. Now I was completely honest about who I was and what I wanted. My relationships were based on mutual respect and authentic connection. My future was uncertain, but entirely my own to shape. The woman who'd calmly eaten birthday cake while her world collapsed had evolved into someone who actively protected her own well-being and demanded integrity from others. The betrayal that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning, painful but necessary, like a forest fire that clears dead growth to make room for new life. 2 years after that catastrophic graduation dinner, I stood in my new home office, preparing for a video conference with potential investors for the renewable energy startup I'd launched with my Intel colleague Sarah. The company, Clark Sustainable Solutions, had grown from a late-night conversation about better battery storage into a legitimate business with 3 employees and a promising patent pending. "Ready for the big pitch?" Sarah asked, adjusting her laptop camera in the conference room we'd rented for the presentation. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, smoothing my professional blazer and checking my notes one final time. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to present to investors on the anniversary of the worst day of my life, transformed now into just another date on the calendar. The presentation went exceptionally well. Our battery storage innovation had caught the attention of several major players in the renewable energy sector. And by the end of the call, we had preliminary commitments for a Series A funding round that would allow us to scale production. After the investors signed off, Sarah and I celebrated with champagne in the conference room, giddy with the realization that our crazy idea might actually change the world while making us financially independent in the process. "I can't believe we just pulled that off," Sarah laughed, refilling our glasses. 2 years ago, you were planning to work for Intel forever, and I was convinced entrepreneurship was too risky for someone with student loans. 2 years ago, I thought my life was completely planned out, I reflected. Funny how catastrophic betrayal can actually be liberating in the long run. Sarah had heard the full story of my graduation dinner disaster during one of our late-night brainstorming sessions, when I'd explained why I was so motivated to build something entirely my own. She'd been appropriately horrified by Ryan and Daniel's behavior, but impressed by how I'd handled the situation. "Speaking of your family situation," she said carefully, "didn't you mention your brother's been trying to reconnect?" I nodded, taking a thoughtful sip of champagne. Over the past year, Ryan had been consistently working to rebuild some form of relationship with me. His therapy seemed to be genuine, and he'd made significant changes in his behavior patterns that suggested real growth rather than manipulation. "We had coffee last month," I admitted. "First time we talked face-to-face since Christmas. It was surprisingly okay." "How so?" He didn't try to minimize what he did or rush me toward forgiveness. He mostly listened while I talked about how his actions affected me, and he asked thoughtful questions about what accountability would look like moving forward. The conversation with Ryan had been emotionally difficult but strangely healing. For the first time in our relationship, he'd centered my experience rather than his own feelings, accepting responsibility without defensiveness or self-pity. I told him I might be willing to have a superficial relationship, family holidays, major life events, that kind of thing, but that the deep twin bond we used to have is probably gone forever, I continued. He accepted that without arguing or trying to negotiate for more. "That sounds like progress," Sarah observed. "It is. I'm not sure we'll ever be close again, but at least we can exist in the same room without me wanting to throw things at him." My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, who'd been promoted to senior engineer at his company and was working late on a critical project launch. "Congratulations on the investor meeting. Can't wait to celebrate properly when I get home. Love you." The relationship with Marcus had evolved slowly and steadily over the past 18 months, built on a foundation of honest communication and shared values. We'd moved in together 6 months earlier, a decision I'd approached with careful consideration rather than romantic impulse. "Marcus seems like a keeper," Sarah commented, noticing my smile as I read his message. "He is," I agreed. "It's nice being with someone who considers my success something to celebrate rather than something to compete with or undermine." The contrast with my previous relationship was stark. Where Daniel had been charming but ultimately selfish, Marcus was quietly supportive in ways that consistently improved my life. Where Daniel had hidden significant aspects of his personality and behavior, Marcus was refreshingly transparent about everything from his finances to his family dynamics. "Are you thinking about marriage?" Sarah asked with the directness of a close friend. "Maybe eventually," I replied honestly. "But I'm in no hurry. I've learned the value of really knowing someone before making major commitments." We finished our champagne and packed up the conference room, both of us energized by the day's success and the possibilities ahead. As I drove home through Portland's familiar streets, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that devastating graduation dinner. The woman who discovered her twin brother's betrayal had been focused primarily on academic achievement and meeting external expectations. The woman driving home from a successful investor presentation was an entrepreneur, a business owner, someone who'd learned to trust her own judgment and create her own opportunities. At home, I found Marcus in our kitchen, having beaten me back despite his work obligations. He'd prepared a simple celebration dinner, pasta with fresh vegetables from our garden and a bottle of wine he'd been saving for special occasions. To Clark's Sustainable Solutions, he toasted as we sat down to eat. And to the brilliant woman who refused to let betrayal define her future. "To second chances," I replied, clinking my glass against his, "and to people who prove that healthy relationships actually exist." Over dinner, I told him about the investor meeting, our funding prospects, and the next steps for growing the company. Marcus listened attentively, asking insightful questions and offering suggestions without trying to take over the conversation or redirect attention to his own achievements. "I'm proud of you," he said simply as we cleaned up together. "Not just for today's success, but for everything you've built since I've known you." The validation felt different from anything I'd experienced in previous relationships. Genuine, unselfish, focused on my actual accomplishments rather than performative enthusiasm designed to serve his own emotional needs. Later that evening, as we relaxed on our couch with tea and a documentary about renewable energy innovations, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something prompted me to answer. "Madison? It's Daniel." I hadn't heard from my former fiancé in over a year. The sound of his voice triggered a complex mix of emotions. Residual anger, curiosity about why he was calling, and a strange detachment, as though hearing from someone I'd known in a previous lifetime. "What do you want, Daniel?" I asked, noting Marcus's concerned expression beside me. "I wanted to congratulate you on your company," Daniel said, his voice carrying an odd formality. "I saw the article about your patent in the Portland Business Journal. It sounds like you're doing amazing things." The article had been published last week, featuring Clark's Sustainable Solutions as one of Portland's most promising clean energy startups. I was surprised Daniel had seen it, given that he'd moved to Seattle and presumably had no reason to follow Portland business news. "Thank you," I replied cautiously, though I'm sure congratulating me isn't the only reason you called. Daniel was quiet for a moment before responding. "You're right. I wanted to apologize. I know it's way too late, and I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I've been in therapy dealing with my issues, and my therapist suggested I make amends to people I've hurt." "Making amends is about more than apologies, Daniel," I replied, drawing on my own therapy work from the past 2 years. "It's about taking responsibility and making changes to ensure you don't cause similar harm in the future." "I know," he said quickly, "and I want you to know that I've been working on that. I've been single for the past year, focusing on understanding why I was such a serial cheater and why I thought lying was easier than honest communication." The conversation felt surreal, discussing personal growth with someone who had caused me such profound pain. But I found myself curious about his perspective on our relationship's destruction. "What have you learned?" I asked. "That I was a coward," Daniel replied without hesitation. "I was afraid of real intimacy, so I kept multiple relationships going so I'd never have to fully commit to anyone. When things got serious with you, when we started planning a future together, I panicked and sabotaged everything instead of dealing with my fears honestly." The explanation made sense, though it didn't excuse his behavior. "And Ryan? How does sleeping with my twin brother fit into that pattern?" Daniel sighed heavily. "Ryan represented the ultimate sabotage, someone who looked exactly like you, but wasn't you. I could tell myself I was still attracted to you while completely destroying our relationship. It was the perfect way to ruin everything while avoiding responsibility for my choices." The psychological analysis was more insightful than I'd expected from Daniel, suggesting his therapy work might be genuine rather than performative. I'm glad you're getting help, I said honestly. But I need you to understand that forgiveness isn't something I owe you, regardless of your personal growth. I do understand that, Daniel replied. I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness or to try to rebuild any kind of relationship with you. I just wanted you to know that I recognize the magnitude of what I did and that I take full responsibility for it. After we hung up, Marcus asked if I was okay. I realized that I was. The conversation with Daniel had been emotionally neutral rather than triggering, another sign of how much healing had occurred over the past 2 years. It's strange, I told Marcus as we got ready for bed. 2 years ago, hearing from him would have ruined my entire week. Tonight, it was just a phone call from someone I used to know. That's growth, Marcus observed. You've built a life where his opinion doesn't matter anymore. He was right. The woman who'd been devastated by Daniel's betrayal had needed his validation and approval to feel worthy. The woman preparing for sleep beside Marcus knew her worth independent of anyone else's recognition or approval. The next morning brought news that our company had been selected as a finalist for Portland's Young Entrepreneur Award, a recognition that would bring significant media attention and networking opportunities. Sarah called me at 7 a.m., practically screaming with excitement about the email she'd received from the awards committee. Madison, we made it. We're going to the award ceremony next month, and we get to pitch to a panel of investors and business leaders. The ceremony would be held at the Portland Art Museum, a prestigious venue that hosted the city's most significant business events. Winners would receive not just recognition, but also a $50,000 grant to support their company's growth. I can't believe this is real, I told Sarah as we met for celebratory coffee later that morning. 2 years ago, I was planning to be a middle management engineer at Intel for the next 30 years. 2 years ago, you thought you knew what your life was supposed to look like, Sarah corrected. Turns out the universe had bigger plans for you. As we discussed our presentation strategy for the award ceremony, I reflected on the unexpected trajectory my life had taken. The betrayal that had destroyed my carefully planned future had forced me to discover strengths and ambitions I'd never known I possessed. The award ceremony took place on a rainy Thursday evening in November, exactly 2 years and 2 months after my disastrous graduation dinner. I stood in the museum's grand hallway, wearing a black cocktail dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, watching Portland's business elite mingle over wine and appetizers. Marcus stood beside me, handsome in his navy suit, providing quiet moral support as I networked with investors and industry leaders. His presence was reassuring without being overwhelming. He understood that this was my moment to shine professionally. Madison Clark? A woman approached us with an extended hand. I'm Jennifer Walsh from the Portland Tribune. I'd love to talk with you about your company's origin story. As I spoke with the journalist, I noticed my parents entering the venue. They'd driven down from Seattle, where they'd relocated after Dad's retirement, specifically to attend the ceremony. Our relationship had improved significantly over the past 2 years as they'd worked to understand their role in enabling Ryan's problematic behavior patterns. Sweetheart, you look beautiful, Mom said, embracing me warmly. We're so proud of what you've accomplished. Dad nodded approvingly as he shook Marcus's hand. Building a company from scratch takes real courage, Madison. You've shown strength I didn't know you had. The comment stung slightly, a reminder that my family had long underestimated my capabilities, but I chose to focus on their current support rather than past oversights. Is Ryan coming? I asked, noting that my brother was conspicuously absent from their group. We invited him, Mom replied carefully, but he said this was your night and he didn't want to risk making you uncomfortable. The consideration was notable. Old Ryan would have attended anyway, finding ways to center himself in my achievement. His absence suggested continued growth in understanding appropriate boundaries. The ceremony began with cocktails and networking, followed by a seated dinner where each finalist would present their company to the audience. Clark Sustainable Solutions was third in the presentation order, giving me time to observe the other finalists and adjust my approach accordingly. When my turn came, I walked to the podium with steady confidence, looking out at an audience of nearly 200 business leaders, investors, and fellow entrepreneurs. 2 years earlier, I'd eaten birthday cake while my world collapsed around me. Tonight, I was presenting my vision for a sustainable energy future to people who could help make that vision reality. 2.5 years ago, I began. I was working late in Intel's engineering lab when a colleague asked me a simple question: why can't we store renewable energy as efficiently as we generate it? That question led to thousands of hours of research, countless failed prototypes, and eventually to the breakthrough that brought us here tonight. I clicked to my first slide, showing Clark Sustainable Solutions' patent-pending battery storage technology. Our innovation increases storage efficiency by 40% while reducing manufacturing costs by 25%. But more importantly, it brings us significantly closer to a world where renewable energy can replace fossil fuels, not just theoretically, but practically. The presentation continued for 12 minutes, covering our technology, market opportunity, financial projections, and environmental impact. I fielded questions from the panel with confidence, drawing on 2 years of intensive research and development work. As I returned to my seat, Marcus squeezed my hand supportively. "You were incredible up there," he whispered. After all the presentations concluded, the judges deliberated while the audience enjoyed dessert and continued networking. I found myself in conversation with several potential investors, exchanging business cards and scheduling follow-up meetings. Madison? I turned to find David Kim, the venture capitalist who'd asked the most challenging questions during my presentation. "I wanted to tell you that your technology is exactly what our clean energy fund has been looking for. I'd like to schedule a formal pitch meeting next week." The conversation with David was interrupted by the awards ceremony organizer calling for everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to announce this year's Young Entrepreneur Award winner." My heart raced as the presenter opened the envelope containing the results. Beside me, Sarah gripped my arm with nervous excitement. This year's winner has demonstrated exceptional innovation in addressing one of our most pressing environmental challenges. Their technology has the potential to revolutionize renewable energy storage, and their business model shows remarkable promise for scalable impact. The pause felt eternal. The Portland Young Entrepreneur Award goes to Madison Clark and Sarah Peterson of Clark Sustainable Solutions. The applause was overwhelming as Sarah and I made our way to the stage. I accepted the crystal trophy with shaking hands, looking out at an audience that included my parents, Marcus, potential investors, and fellow entrepreneurs, all celebrating our achievement. "Thank you so much for this incredible honor," I said into the microphone. This award isn't just recognition of our technology. It's validation that Portland supports entrepreneurs who are working to solve real problems and create positive change. I paused, making eye contact with my parents in the audience. 2 years ago, my life looked completely different. I thought I knew exactly what my future held, and I was comfortable with that predictability. Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that could happen to you. The speech was brief but heartfelt, acknowledging the investors, mentors, and supporters who'd helped make our success possible. As I left the stage with Sarah, trophy in hand, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with external validation and everything to do with knowing I'd built something meaningful from nothing. At the after party, I found myself surrounded by congratulations and business cards, invitations to speak at conferences, and opportunities to expand our company's reach. The $50,000 prize would fund our next phase of development, but more importantly, the recognition would open doors we'd been trying to unlock for months. "I'm proud of you," my father said as the evening wound down. "Not just for winning tonight, but for how you've handled everything over the past 2 years. You've shown grace under pressure and resilience in the face of betrayal." "Thank you, Dad," I replied, meaning it genuinely. "That means a lot coming from you." As Marcus and I drove home through Portland's quiet streets, I reflected on the extraordinary journey from that devastating graduation dinner to this triumphant evening. The betrayal that had shattered my old life had forced me to discover who I really was beneath the expectations and assumptions I'd carried for years. "So," Marcus said as we pulled into our driveway, "how does it feel to be Portland's Young Entrepreneur of the Year?" I considered the question seriously. "It feels like the beginning of something amazing," I replied. "But more than that, it feels like proof that I can trust myself to navigate whatever comes next." We sat in the car for a moment, trophy gleaming in the streetlight, both of us processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. "I love you," Marcus said quietly, "not because you won an award tonight, but because you're the kind of person who turns betrayal into motivation and pain into purpose." "I love you too," I replied, meaning it completely. "Thank you for being someone I can trust with my heart." As we walked into our home, our real home, built on honesty and mutual respect, I felt a deep gratitude for the unexpected path that had led me here. The woman who'd been blindsided by her twin brother's betrayal had evolved into someone who could handle success, failure, and everything in between with equal grace. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but full of possibility. And for the first time in my life, I was completely confident in my ability to shape it according to my own values and dreams, rather than anyone else's expectations or limitations. The story that had begun with catastrophic betrayal had become one of redemption, growth, and the discovery that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted creates space for something far better than you'd ever imagined possible.